Welcome to the Douglas Murray channel, where we delve into thought-provoking debates and discussions. Today we'll explore some critical points from a debate on the integration of Muslims in Europe. Grab your seat as the debate will get juicy.
Well, a very passionate and fluent opening there to our debate. Against the motion is Douglas Murray. He is the director of the Centre for Social Cohesion here in Britain, which tries to promote integration between Britain's ethnic minorities and the wider population, and it specialises in radicalisation. So, Douglas Murray, your time starts now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tariq says that Europeans associate Islam with violence. There is some truth in that. There is also a very obvious reason for that, which is that Islam is associated with violence. It was not Buddhists who flew planes into the Twin Towers. It was not Hindus or Jews that blew up the London Underground buses a few years ago. And that simple fact has to be acknowledged if you're even going to start a dialogue. Now, what is happening, ladies and gentlemen, it's not a pantomime. I'd argue that Europe has done not too badly, considering the circumstances. In the middle of the last century, there was an almost negligible Muslim presence in Europe. At the turn of the 21st, in Western Europe alone, there were 15 to 17 million Muslims. That's a very fast migration, ladies and gentlemen, one of the fastest in human history. And no society would find it easy to deal with that kind of migration. As it happens, European societies, Western European societies have, I think, dealt with this much better than some would. Certainly, Muslims coming to live in Britain and in Western Europe enjoy more rights and better rights, among them freedom of worship, than they do in any Islamic country in the earth here today. We do have a problem. We have a problem when the failures of Islam throughout the world, the failures of all Islamic societies, come here into Britain. Their intolerance of freedom of conscience, their intolerance of apostates, their intolerance of freedom of expression and freedom of speech, their intolerance of minorities, other religious minorities, sexual minorities, their intolerance of gays, their dislike and distrust of half of the population, women, and many, many other things. And the call, what's more, for a parallel legal system within Britain and...
Douglas Murray argues that Islam is associated with violence, citing historical events like 9/11 and the London bombings. He suggests that Western Europe has dealt admirably with the rapid migration of Muslims, offering them more rights than they might enjoy in Islamic countries. Are these points valid or overly generalized?
European societies, this is monstrous. No other group behaves like this, asks for parallel laws. This is a fundamental problem, and it's one we're going to have to deal with. It's a problem between a society, Western Europe, that believes that laws are based on reason, and Islam that believes that they are based on revelation. Between these two ideas, I'm not sure there is very much compromise for Europe. It is not Europe that has let down its Muslims, but the Muslims of Europe that have let down Europe. This is not solely something which we have to say we can never reconcile. Of course we can reconcile this, but we need to be honest about it. We need to be frank about it, and we cannot avoid things just because they are unpleasant. And if there were one thing I would wish Muslims in Europe could learn today, as fast as possible, it would be this: that you have no right in this society not to be offended. You have no right to say that because you don't like something, you can commit violence, or you would like something to be stopped or censored. You have no right to have more hate laws, or hate crime laws, or hate speech laws, just to defend Islam. You have to realize, the Muslims of Europe have to realize, that a society in which even your deepest feelings can be trodden upon is the only society worth living in. And the sooner we can learn that, the sooner that Islam can learn that within Europe, the better. It is not Europe that has failed its Muslims. It is Islam that has failed Europe. I'd argue Islam has failed its Muslims. Thank you.
Well, you certainly stirred things up a bit there, didn't you, Douglas Murray? Thank you very much indeed. OK, well, let me invite some comments from the floor, and let's go...
Murray highlights the clash between Western laws based on reason and Islamic laws based on revelation, criticizing the push for parallel legal systems. He emphasizes that in a free society, no one has the right to avoid offense, arguing that Muslims in Europe must accept this principle. Is this a fair assessment of integration challenges?
Lady there, yeah.
I just had a question to a few questions to Mr. Murray. I don't think it's the Muslims of Europe that have failed, the Muslims of Europe that have failed Europe. I think it's exactly the opposite. One of the things you said, it was actually a few Muslims, crazy Muslims, I think, who sort of flew the plane into those buildings. But was Hitler a Muslim by any chance? Because I'm not sure that Muslims had anything to do with the Holocaust.
Okay. Gentleman there.
In 2009, the Centre for Muslim Studies, along with the Gallup poll, interviewed 500 British Muslims. Over 99.5% of those British Muslims found homosexual acts unacceptable. What was interesting is that the government has given concession to Muslims as well as other religious organisations. So it seems to me, in fact, this government here is prepared to give religious organisations, including Muslims, the rights over lots of gay men and women.
You talked about how Europe has dealt with this problem, and what you basically have alluded to in the 6 minutes that you had are that Muslims are a problem. And you're from the organisation called the Centre for Social Cohesion, and it's worrying that to have you talk about these things in this manner. What you are basically alluding to is that Muslims are external to Europe, and it's worrying that you see it that way, because then that means there is no chance of there being any solution to any problem or Muslims being seen as a part of Europe and being seen as European citizens. Thank you.
Gentleman there.
I just want to pick up something that Douglas Murray said. I'd like to ask you, when you talk about the Muslims that are the problem, which Muslims are you talking about? Because you keep slipping in your language to focus on the radicals, the extremists.
Okay, right.
Maybe that's because that's what you're interested in. But there's another whole set of Muslims out there who are not like that.
Okay, just a quick clutch there.
It is sufficient to point out that Europe is not failing its Muslims, that this debate is taking place tonight and is being televised by the BBC World Service, that Tariq Ramadan holds a chair at Oxford University. I put it to you because of these very facts, that you are being welcomed, that you are being integrated, that you are being respected. You are not a problem.
Okay.
A member of the audience challenges Murray, suggesting that Europe's treatment of Muslims is the real issue. They argue that Murray's stance implies Muslims are outsiders in Europe, which hinders integration. How can these differing perspectives on inclusion be reconciled?
Douglas Murray, Director of the Centre for Social Cohesion, a think tank which studies radicalisation and extremism in Britain. Your closing statements.
Thank you. Well, first of all, just to pick up on a couple of people, particularly women, who've said about the terrific things that Islam gives women in terms of rights. The first thing is, yes, in 7th century Arabia, some of this was progressive. In 21st century Britain, it is not. And you have to make that fundamental admission that the Quran is not a document for women's rights in Europe in 2010. It is not. Secondly, why is it that only Islamic societies and mosques in this country are places which teach and preach hatred of other minorities? Every single week in this country, there are people on campuses who teach the murder of minorities. Last week, it was somebody who calls for the murder of apostates. The week before, at another university, it was somebody who believes the Jews are fair game. This is not tolerable. It is not tolerable for Muslims. It is not tolerable from anyone else. You, I hope, would agree with me that any minority that engaged in such hatred and bigotry should be criticised. Don't pretend that the cloak of Islam and Islamic belief and religious fervour means that people like us cannot say that people who call for the murder of minorities are not mainstream, are not acceptable, and have to be critiqued.
So, Tariq Ramadan, Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at Oxford University. Final word goes to you, your closing statement, incorporating some of the points raised by our audience.
Thank you for that, and welcome to Social Cohesion. That's really nice. So I would say here that when we look at what is happening now, I am saying yes, now Europe...
In his closing statement, Murray condemns the teaching of hatred in some Islamic societies and mosques in Britain. He asserts that such intolerance is unacceptable and should be criticized regardless of religious context. Can such strong critiques foster better social cohesion? Thank you for joining us in exploring these contentious yet crucial topics. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for more insightful debates on the Douglas Murray channel.